we don't have a downtown. We don't have a lot of businesses. We don't have a school. We don't have churches. We don't, there's lots of things that we typically think of as being in a community we just don't have those things by design. We'd have them if we wanted them probably, but we don't. And so I don't think that the municipal model is a good fit for what we are, but I do think that people in local areas want to have some control over their own destiny. They want to be able to assert their own views and their own values in terms of how their community looks and what things are there and the kind of even when it comes down to things like noise and nuisances and all those other things, just like in any municipality, we want to have some say in that.
Welcome to Cross Border Interviews, the show where we sit down with municipal political leaders from across Canada. Now, our mission on the show is twofold. One, get to know the amazing communities all across this country, whether they big, small, rural, urban. We want to learn about all of them. And two, get to know and speak directly to those who spend their days day in and day out working around the council table to make the communities what they are today. And for today's episode, we are honored to have gotten to travel to Haines Junction, Yukon, to attend the 50th anniversary of the Association of Yukon Communities. While there at the convention, we sat down with today's guests, Hamlet of Mt. Lorne Chair and Councillor Kevin Kennedy. Across Canada, our cities, towns, villages, and rural communities are alive with stories waiting to be told. Stories of innovation and economic development, resilience in the face of the housing challenges, and the financial hurdles municipalities overcome every day. At the Cross Border Network, we bring these stories to life. From coast to coast to coast, we're connecting Canadians to the issues shaping our communities and showcasing the people working tirelessly to make them thrive. With your support, we can expand our reach, amplify more voices, and shine a light on the challenges and triumphs of municipal life. For as little as $3.99 a month, you can help us grow and continue sharing the stories that matter most. Join us today and be part of this important mission. Together, we can tell more stories, build stronger communities, and make a real difference. Support the Cross Border Network now. Visit www.crossborderinterviews.ca today. Kevin, thank you so much for sitting down with me and talking about local advisory areas. Councils.
Local advisory councils represent local advisory areas.
Okay.
We just tend to call them LACs.
I will get that before the end of this interview is done. First off, can you just, and I hate to ask the grade 2 question, but I'm going to in this context, what is an LAC in regards to municipalities?
Well, you can certainly be forgiven because lots of people don't know what those are. So, in the Yukon, under the Municipal Act, there are a couple of different ways to organize community, used sort of in a loose sense. There are municipalities, which are much like those in other parts of Canada. And then we also have something called local advisory areas, which are represented by local advisory councils. And those are unincorporated areas. There are actually 5 of them in the Yukon. And those areas, although they're unincorporated, of course, they still have populations who still want services, and they still want to be able to voice their views and their requests and so forth to the Yukon government. And so the Yukon government essentially creates this opportunity for there to be a council, which is elected in the same way as a municipal council will be elected. We have our elections at the same time, that advises the government on all of this sort of quasi-municipal services that things that would be provided by a municipality in our areas, but which we don't have a municipality, and the Yukon government sort of acts as our municipality, if you like, in terms of at least the service providing or service provision.
So how far back do these go? Is this just something relatively new? Because I'm trying to think of other examples where an LAC would be applicable in other provinces or territories. Is this unique to the Yukon, that LACs? Or?
That's a good question. I don't know that it's unique to the Yukon.
Okay.
There may well be something similar that exists in other parts of Canada.
So are you appointed by the territorial government, or are you appointed?
So we're not appointed. We are elected.
So you are elected.
So we're
elected. You go through
yeah.
municipal council elections.
That's right. We go through the same council elections that the municipalities do. The biggest difference, of course, is that we don't get property tax revenue directly, nor do we get direct revenue from the Yukon government to provide the services. Rather, we advise the government on the services that are being provided or that could be provided. We get a little bit of funding, but it's certainly not enough. And in fact, we are not even allowed to, for instance, own capital equipment or to provide. I guess we have a little flexibility in terms of community events and things like that where we can spend our money. But really, we are there. So
what do you advise on then? That may sound like the very...
if you would like me to be honest, I will tell you that often we say, we're just like a municipal government, but we have no money and no power.
So you're just like municipal government.
Yeah, well, in a way, we are just like them in that. I'm sure they would say that they have no money, no power either. But we really have no money, and we really have no legislative power. So although in my community, for example, we have a local area plan, which was approved by the government, and our community said, this is what we want, this is the zoning we want, so on and so forth. We have no say in the implementation of that. So when the government decides tomorrow that they want to create something in our community and change the zoning and so forth, they may still have an obligation to consult with us, but we have no veto power. We don't get to say yes or no. We don't get to make bylaws for our community. Instead, what we do is we say, hey, we think that the rules should change in our community. Hey, Yukon government, will you please change them for us?
Does it work? Does it work good?
Sometimes.
Okay.
I think when what the community is asking for is in good alignment with the things that the government sees as priorities, it works great. And in fact, they're really responsive. They're really, I think, constructive in helping us to achieve some of the things that we want. So in that respect, it works really well. Where it doesn't work is sometimes we disagree. So we had a situation that's actually come up in a couple of local advisory area communities recently where the government wanted to build some new facilities, which, for the good of the territory, but they weren't things that really were needed or wanted in the community. The community said, no, we don't want this, but we got them anyway. So that's where I think, maybe people who live in municipalities take that for granted. They just assume that if our community says we don't want a thing, or if we say we do want a thing, we get to decide on the merits, pros and cons, and so forth. And of course, sometimes people are disappointed. There's nothing you can do about that. You can't always please everyone.
I'm shocked to hear that. I'm shocked to hear.
Absolutely, and I think all municipalities deal with that. In our case, though, as I described it to somebody from Yukon government's land planning branch the other day, they were describing to me how they had gone through a long process of what they see as consultation, and that they'd provided all the information to the decision makers, and the decision makers had made the decision to go ahead with something that the community didn't want. And so what I said was, well, I guess their point was, well, the decision makers finally, they weighed the evidence and then they made the decision. Maybe you didn't like the decision. My point was, actually, we thought we were the decision makers. And so that was where the problem was. We had a real disconnection between our community and, in that case, the Yukon government, because the Yukon government was the decision maker for us. It's a little bit paternalistic, if you like. But our community thought we should be the decision makers. And so that's something that, I think comes from being a smaller place. It's funny because we're not smaller in terms of population. The local advisory council areas are actually comparable in size to a number of smaller Yukon communities.
The one that I was just chatting with a lady at the 50th anniversary of the Association of Yukon Communities, which we're recording this at, need to do the quick plug before I continue, said that there's a community down south, Carcross. There's about 300 people there, roughly 300 people.
Right.
And that's larger, and that's a LAC, and that's a larger community than some of the actual municipalities.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to ask a very political question, but I think you're ready for it. Do you see LACs ever evolving into the municipal realm, or are LACs comfortable where they are right now? And I know it's probably different for you compared to someone for another council, and this is your opinion, and I should just mention that.
I wouldn't dare speak on behalf of every LAC, although I am their representative to the AYC. So in some ways, and in fact, I actually attended all of the LAC meetings in the last month. So I think I have a bit of a feel for where people are. We also just had a forum where we all met together. And I think that I don't think anybody is saying, we want to be a municipality tomorrow. We're not really ready for that. That comes with a lot of responsibilities. I don't know that citizens in our communities want that. That would mean a different property tax regime. It would mean all sorts of other changes.
Yeah.
One of the reasons people live in rural areas is because they kind of want to be in rural areas. In my community, I think the smallest lot sizes are something like 6 acres, right?
Oh,
so they're large. That's not true of all the LACs. Some of them have quite small, more like city-sized lots. But I don't think I certainly wouldn't dare say that everybody wants to be a municipality tomorrow. But I do think that there is a little bit of an appetite for discussions about how do we manage this relationship with the Yukon government to provide the services that people in our communities want, while at the same time not taking on more responsibility than we have the capacity to handle. And in my community, for instance, because we're all pretty spread out, we're a very large geographic area. We don't have a downtown. We don't have a lot of businesses. We don't have a school. We don't have churches. We don't. There's lots of things that we typically think of as being in a community we just don't have those things by design. We'd have them if we wanted them, probably, but we don't. And so I don't think that the municipal model is a good fit for what we are, but I do think that people in local areas want to have some control over their own destiny. They want to be able to assert their own views and their own values in terms of how their community looks and what things are there and the kind of even when it comes down to things like noise and nuisances and all those other things, just like in any municipality, we want to have some say in that. And right now, although we have some say in the sort of advisory sense,
say and being heard is two different things.
We get consulted a lot. And again, I won't say that consultation is irrelevant or meaningless. I think the people who are doing the consulting are very sincere in their desire to try to meet our needs. But I don't think you could go to Faro or Teslin or Whitehorse and say to somebody, yes, we're listening to you, but we're going to do what you want, or we're going to do what we want, not what you want, every single time, and that they would be happy with that. I don't think anybody would think that was a reasonable thing, but for some reason we do think it's reasonable for people who live in unincorporated areas. So
I paint a broad stroke when I ask this question. I do not mean any attack on anyone in the Yukon. I think this is an issue across Canada. Apathy and misunderstanding of the jurisdictional roles that every level of government plays is at an all-time low right now. People aren't engaged. People just don't understand.
Yeah.
I'd be hard-pressed to say that they probably know you as a councillor for the LAC of your community more than they probably know their MLA or even their MP.
I don't know that that's true in our community. Well, and I say that because we have a very active MLA, for instance. He comes to all of our council meetings. So in that sense, we're lucky because everything is small here.
See,
we can't avoid our representatives.
I get slapped in the face every time.
And I bet you that's true in many parts of the Yukon. I'm sure that
many parts
people
of Canada.
do, and many parts of Canada. Of course, it's true. But here, the populations are small, and so we do know our representatives. Though I certainly do have to agree with you that there's some misunderstanding about jurisdiction. There's misunderstanding about who provides services.
Because as the LAC,
we often say the thing I said to you. So people in the community come to me and they say, hey, we need to do something about such and such. And I say, well, we don't have any money, we don't have any power, but we'll write you a letter. And that's kind of where it comes down to. And I'm exaggerating a little because some of it's that soft. Well, I'm not. But on the other hand, there is some soft
So
power,
what's
I guess, that comes with knowing the right people and talking to them and persuasion and all of that stuff. You know, we do have some influence. It's not that we have zero influence. It's just that the influence doesn't come with there's no stick. It's all kind of persuasion and carrots.
What would a win look like for an LAC then in the Yukon?
A win, you mean in terms of like we are making a request?
Your advocacy would work, and people would that be a win where you would advise the territorial government to do something and they would actually follow through on it? Or would a win be they come to you and say, we have some money for you, or we have some issue that we want to solve with you together? What's a win? Because it seems like, and I'm picking this up in the conversation we've had in the first, looking at the clock, 12 minutes.
Yeah.
You give your recommendations to the territorial government. It sounds like not a lot of times they're actually following through on the recommendation.
Sorry, and if that's the impression I created, that's wrong.
That's okay.
We get what we ask for most of the time.
Okay.
But the reason we get what we ask for is because, the reason we get what we ask for is because the territorial government doesn't have any reason not to give it. You know, sometimes it's because it's very much in alignment with what they like. It's when those things are in conflict, when the community has some needs, desires, values that are in conflict with what the territorial government is hoping to push or has promised to someone else, or for whatever reason it's a priority for them. When those things come into conflict,
I'm very glad I clarified
which doesn't happen that often.
Okay.
Of course, you know, we all get along real well, and we're all kind of on the same page most of the time. But when we aren't, unfortunately, we sort of feel like, well, we ought to have a veto power. It's our community. If we don't want a certain kind of zoning, we don't want a certain kind of activity in our community, we feel like we should have a meaningful say in that. But we don't. And so that's where it starts to, you know, kind of the constraints start to feel onerous, or where we get uncomfortable, is that we want to represent our community. I'm elected. I am an elected person. So in that sense,
do you get a lot of acclamations, or do you
we absolutely get almost all acclamations. Yes, absolutely we do. Yeah. And, you know, that's partly because there isn't that much at stake, of course, right? We don't have a $1 million budget to spend. And so, you know, people don't necessarily recognize the value in, well, I wouldn't say they don't recognize the value, but, you know, of course, it's like anything else. We're essentially all volunteers, and you know, the reason we're a community at all is because we have volunteers. It's because we have a community association, because we have a volunteer fire department. It's because we have all these things that make us a community. It's not the government that makes us a community. It's the people in our community. So in that sense, yeah, we have lots of acclamation because, you know, like any community, like any group of volunteers, all the same people are on all the boards and do all the things. And so, sometimes they get tired. That's what happens.
I want to ask a sort of a double-ended question, and I want you to answer it both ways if possible. What would you say, and actually I'm going to clarify this before. This is a conversation with the councillor and myself. This is not a motion of the advisory committee. This is not a consideration. This is just his opinion. No, I just need to make sure, because I'll get an email at least from one person. In your opinion, what do you see as the biggest challenge facing LACs today as of recording this? And then on the flip side of that, what do you see as the biggest challenge facing the Hamlet of Mt. Lorne today?
I think the biggest challenge for all LACs is providing services that, and again, it's not just up to us to provide those services, but to you know, I guess advocate for and try to engender the provision of the services that people need close to home. And so, you know, I'll give you an example. During COVID and more recently, we've asked the Department of Health. We have lots of seniors in our community that don't travel. They don't drive into Whitehorse. That's a difficult thing for them to do. It's 40 kilometers away, and so they don't want to do that. And so we said, can we get some vaccine clinics at our community center? And the answer was, oh, no, you can't. You can just go to Whitehorse. Okay, so that's the kind of challenge that I think all the LAC areas deal with, and you know. In our case,
but put that into context for people who are listening right now. Mm-hmm. From Mount Lorne to Whitehorse, well, how far is that?
It's depending on which end of Mount Lorne you're at. It's, you know, somewhere between 40 and 50 kilometers, let's say.
Okay, where's the furthest LAC from Whitehorse?
That would be Tagish, which is more like 90 kilometers. 90 or so, I think. Yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah.
you're a good hour and a half to go to a
Yeah,
clinic.
exactly. Yeah. So it's a long way, and so I think, and that's just one example.
Yeah.
That's also recreation services, which
Yeah.
can be really challenging. In our community, we own our own community center, and that's the hub basically for our community. We offer seniors programs, we offer kids programs, we offer recreation of all sorts. We have ski trails, we have a golf course, we even have a Zamboni for our for our ice rink. And so providing all those services and having the money, basically to cover those costs is really, really a challenge. And I think that's a challenge in all communities. The community of Tagish, for example, is another LAC. Their community center just burned down, unfortunately. I'm a volunteer firefighter. I was there. It was heartbreaking. Yeah. And so, that means the government has to step up and help to provide, a way to get back to having those services. And I don't doubt that they will, but ultimately, in the long term, it's still going to be a challenge to provide the things that community really needs. Because you can build a building, but that's not enough to run programs, as everybody in municipal government knows. It's all about O&M, and it's all about staffing, and it's all about, we have lots of volunteers, but mobilizing those volunteers, applying for the funding, doing the reporting, all that stuff is really, really challenging. And our community association has its own board, and they're awesome. They do their very best, but they can't pay enough to compete with government jobs in Whitehorse and those sorts of things. So I would say generally for all LACs, just being able to get those services locally where we need them and want them, that's the biggest challenge. And for Mount Lorne in particular, I think, and this is just my opinion, I can't say I speak on behalf of my council here.
That's why I had to put that low.
I am, but I think that what we have to do is really establish our identity as a community. I think we've spent an awful lot of time trying to explain to other people, no, we really are a community. We're not just the sort of most southernmost subdivision in Whitehorse, right? We're not. We are a half an hour drive away. Our kids are not going to be going into town to go play at a playground to go down the slide, right?
Yeah.
I mean, sure, maybe they do that occasionally. It's not that far away. Lots of parents probably commute into town, but kids don't go to school in town. And so, having a playground in our community, that's the kind of stuff that only happens when people recognize that we're a community. When somebody in the Yukon government, when they do this all the time, okay, and I'm sure other provinces and territories have the same thing, where somebody from government says, okay, we got to go out and do a dog and pony show and go consult with people in all these different places. Well, they look at their list of communities and they say, okay, we'll have a public meeting there and a public meeting there and a public meeting there. But we don't make that list because we're not a real community. Sometimes we do, of course, but I think it's really important for us to establish we're a real community. One of our biggest victories, this will sound terrible, but one of our biggest victories in the last few years is we got a sign. We finally got the government to give us a sign that says, welcome to the Hamlet of Mt. Lorne, with all the little service things on it.
Yes.
That was so exciting because it means that everybody who passes through now understands, I'm crossing a boundary here. I'm now in a community, and I never even realized, wow, there are a lot of things in this community. Oh, there are cross-country ski trails here. We've got a recreation areas. We've got a historic site. We've got a golf course, all of these things that we have. Fire department and so on, right? That I think otherwise people might not realize are there because there's no downtown. We don't we don't look like a typical community.
There's no pull off so you can go.
No, but we certainly are one. And I'll give you one last example of where not being on the list can be important. In the current federal election that's about to happen on Monday, I have to rush back to get back to vote. I have to drive 30 kilometers to vote because we didn't make the list. We didn't make the list for a polling station. Neither did Tagish or Carcross, which are even farther away than where I live.
So where's your voting booth?
So we have to go to a place called Golden Horn, which is just on the outskirts of Whitehorse. There's a school. That's where our local school is, I guess, the closest school to our community. It's 15, 20-minute drive. So that's where we have to go to vote. And in the past, we've had polling stations at our community center. We've had them in Carcross. We've had them in Tagish. We've had them in Marsh Lake. But this time around, for whatever reason, we didn't make the cut. And so to me, in Mount Lorne, one of my biggest priorities as chair of our LAC for the next couple of years is just to continue chipping away and working on this problem of making sure that other levels of government, I mean, the territorial government is the first and easiest for us, but that also includes First Nation governments, whose territory we are in three overlapping First Nation territories. So First Nation governments, other municipal governments recognizing who we are, the territorial government, the federal government. We need a postal code. Nobody will give us a postal code. So even though I live in a community that's, I live 30-minute drive from Whitehorse, I have a Whitehorse address, even though I have a community mailbox at the end of my road, but the post office doesn't understand that we're a community. It's silly, and certainly there might be some people who would say, well, I guess maybe you're not a community. Well, I guess you're not, because nobody recognizes it, and yeah, sure, you're not in Whitehorse, but you're half an hour away. I mean, there's an argument to be made there, I guess, but the fact that we think we're a community and the fact that we act like one, that we have volunteers and a community garden and a community center and all of these different things that we have, I think that should be evidence enough that we're a community. Yeah. We just have to make sure everybody else understands that, so that when we ask for services, when we ask for even consultation, when we ask to have our voices heard, that there's somebody recognizing that they ought to be listening.
So, last question, I'll flip it a little bit on here.
Sure.
So you talk about the challenges, which sounds like there's a lot. What's the good things that go on, though? What's the things that you look at and say, we do have our challenges, but we have this going for us? What's that X
You mean
factor?
in terms of being an unincorporated LAC area?
Your community, the Hamlet?
Well, I mean, for our community, it's our volunteers and our community spirit. That's what makes it happen. That's why I love to live where I live. I mean, of course, we have the natural beauty and all of that. That just kind of comes with being in the Yukon. I think we get that all over the territory. But I would say it's that sense of community, the fact that there's people who really care. They care about their neighbors. They help each other. They talk to each other. We all meet at the transfer station while we're dropping off our recycling, and we chat, and we have community events. We have these wonderful facilities like cross-country ski trails that people love and use. And I will, sorry, this is not what I love, but I'm going to just throw this out there. Something I'm really working on, or that drives me a little crazy, is we don't have enough funding to provide those services, that even the ones that we can provide in our community, we don't have enough money for that. So we have to charge user fees to use our cross-country ski trails. Nobody else in the Yukon has to do that except in our areas, as far as I know. So
they're easy.
When you have, exactly. When the health benefits, all the benefits that come from having those recreational facilities that people can just go and use is immense. And we just heard a presentation today from the Recreation Association of the Yukon saying, hey, this is, you've got to keep providing more and more of these things, and they're providing funding and all those things. But in our case, we can't scrape enough money together to do that without charging user fees. And that's just wrong. Yeah. And that's not the standard that we should have for people in the Yukon. We should all have access to those recreational services without having to pay for them.
I want to thank you so much for this. This has been honestly a pleasure, Councillor. Greatly appreciate it.
Oh, anytime.
We want to thank everyone for tuning in for another episode of Cross-Border Interviews. Now, we hope you've enjoyed today's episode and gained some valuable insights into the world of Yukon municipalities. We also want to take a moment and thank those who made the trip up to Haines Junction, Yukon, a massive success. And to the team at the Association of Yukon Communities for having us during the 3-day convention in Haines Junction. We look forward to being back in the Yukon later on this year for the territorial elections. Now, to stay in the loop with all of the latest episodes, don't forget to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform or on YouTube, and follow us on social media. For even more content and learn more about the stories and people we feature on this show and our sister shows, visit us online at crossborderinterviews.ca. Now, your support means the world to us, so share this episode with your friends, your family, and yes, even your community, and help keep the conversation going. Until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and we'll see you next time on Cross Border Interviews. Till then.